What's a sign of childhood trauma? Finding someone perfect for you and then systematically sabotaging it. Me currently. Found the perfect person for me. 100% think we were made for each other, but now that things are looking like they are going to get serious. Everything in my body is screaming to run away and trying to find faults in them. I'd say talk to a therapist if you can, and maybe have an honest talk to your partner and start with what you just said here. I see two scenarios: either you can overcome this, in which case if they're in on the loop they can maybe help you do it, or you'll fuck it up and will probably hurt them in the process, and at least they'll have a heads up. The things that were done to you are not your fault, but you are not a broken or damaged person. You can still overcome, so acknowledge that and try to steer your actions in that direction. In the end of the day, the choices are up to you, and you deserve to be happy. Scared of conflict to the point you avoid it at all costs. Certain that if it happens the other person will hate you / it will end awfully. You've never seen people calmly sit down and discuss their emotions in a loving way. So that world doesn't exist. Hey look, it's me. I have been always scared of conflict to the point of crying. Always saying sorry. Feeling guilty for speaking up. My last boss told me I don't need to apologize, so much I apologized for it. It's instinctive to me. Difficulty making relationships. Fears of being judged and low self-esteem. Sometimes I can't believe that women are even interested and even listening to what I'm saying and reciprocating as well. I feel this way too. I'm always shocked. Unable to forgive themselves for small mistakes. The more I go down, the more I realize, fuck, I'm right there with you. Unfortunately, I don't have most of my childhood memories, so I guess I'm okay. Oversharing when you haven't known the person long, or the opposite, where you don't open up to anybody. Two extremes. What about both? Oversharing with total strangers, but not opening up to friends / family. That's me, but not in-person strangers. Only online strangers, where I can be anonymous. Completely shutting down when criticized or corrected. Took me years to get past this. Edit. Okay. Was not expecting this level of response. Hell, I didn't even know this was a diagnosis with a name. Rejection sensitive dysphoria. In an attempt to answer questions, I'll explain as succinctly as possible. TL. Doctor at the bottom. Backstory. My parents are boomers. Dad grew up in a coal mining town in southern Illinois. Was a Vietnam Marine turned missionary in Uganda in the late 70s. Interesting times is his description. Mom grew up in Savannah and survived the civil rights and integration riots of the Deep South. Became a missionary to South America also in the late 70s. Vival our evolution, so suffice it to say they've lived through some shit and are orders of magnitude harder fucks than I'll ever be. They didn't have the tools we do today to diagnose and cope, so they internalized all of it instead, on top of a ton of old-fashioned generational blue-collar trauma. As is tradition, it was passed on to me. How I recognized and started treating it. Boot camp got the ball rolling. It keeps you at a functional high level of stress, to the point you just have to deal with it. There's no time to shut down or feel sorry for yourself. You showed up behind schedule and don't realize you've caught up until you get to your first unit and oversleep for the first time on your day off. I lucked up and my then girlfriend spotted it. She stopped letting me retreat to my dark place. I eventually married her. Even then it was years before we realized how broken I was. I found mentors in different areas of interest. Some were authors or had podcasts. The main one was a gunsmith and had a PhD of history who took me in when my parents split. He gave solid advice which I took to heart. PT. The hardest part is working out and building discipline. Sometimes I have to be at muscle failure before I can think straight. Research. I've been reading up on stress, trauma, PTSD, recovery, historical warrior cultures, meditation, all of it. Been attacking this like an engineer or mechanic instead of a doctor. Lastly, most importantly, I got help from other people. I could not do this alone. It was just too much to process. TL. DR1. Boot camp. No time for self-recrimination. Too much shit to do. 2. Found a friend willing and able to help. 3. Found mentors. In person and in books/podcasts 4. Physical training. It sucks but works 5. Researched the topic across multiple disciplines and cultures. Strangely I never found the RSD diagnosis. 6. I got help. I found people to help me. Yes, I always feel like I have to explain myself because I think people wouldn't criticize or correct me if they knew what I was thinking. How did you get past it? Took me a long time. And working on a small management team with somebody who decided day one that they despised me for no good reason because we were equal partners. And he was 45 years my senior. Worked with him for 2 years. You can be the sweetest peach in the orchard. Some people just don't like peaches at the end of the day. You can carry that shit home with you and let it give you ulcers, ruin your relationships, or genuinely be at peace with asking yourself what more could I have done? And having the grace and conviction to be able to tell yourself you did your best. Sometimes those people don't care what you were thinking. And that's okay. You don't have to care what they think of you. That's not your burden to bear. Choosing partners who don't support, cherish or value you. Choosing jobs and relationships that reflect the lack of empathy and neglect that you grew up with. Choosing partners who don't support, cherish or value you. Now, fuck. Can we also add staying with partners who use, manipulate, gaslight or traumatize you further? But yeah, this definitely does describe me. Unfortunately, thankfully I'm out of that relationship now since she cheated on me, but I can't deny that relationship has scarred me quite badly to the point that I get panic attacks the moment I see someone who looks similar to her. Peacekeeping. A kid doesn't realize their parent, mom in my case, is an emotionally abusive asshole. All I knew is I didn't want people to be so mad at each other. I think my life would have been better if I hadn't talked them out of divorce. I think so. My parents fought constantly. Verbal abuse at its finest. As the oldest, I'm the peacekeeper. Then I became an unwilling counselor for my mom in my early teens and a whipping boy for my stepdad. These two should never have been together, and our lives would have been better had they divorced. Ouch, that unwilling counselor part is so fucking relatable. My mom often says these days I was more like her husband because I was her emotional support system. I was 12. She just doesn't realize what that meant to me when I was young, and how I felt used and was expected to grow beyond my years. I didn't do it out of love. I was guilted into it. I'm 29 now. I find it disgusting. Childish activities become almost like treats. Edit. Since this is getting big, people can just enjoy watching things from their childhood, or playing games, or whatever independently from trauma. But it is incredibly common for the people with trauma to basically want to relive their childhood that they lost when they are in a safer environment. I always find myself playing video games from my childhood, or watching stuff like The Simpsons when I'm feeling stressed. Don't want to sound like an asshole if you did have childhood trauma, but maybe you just enjoy those things? Yeah. I've just noticed that when I get stressed or start feeling down about life, I tend to gravitate toward things that are familiar and comforting. That's just a healthy way to deal with stress. I do the same thing with video games and other shows. They make no eye contact. I know, because even at the age of 45 I will always struggle with autism. I thought I had autism because of this. I just know it feels as if I'm staring into the sun whenever I make eye contact. Personally, I find it easier to stare into the sun than to make eye contact. I'm always scared that people are mad at me. Always. Sometimes I'll mute someone for a day just so I can preempt them ignoring me because I'm sure they're mad at me. Then end up seeing their next messages later. Like, wow, I fell asleep early last night. I really like that book you mentioned, BTW. I think I'm the opposite. I'll ignore a message I read for about 2 or 3 days. Then I won't answer it because I can't think of an excuse for not answering for 2 or 3 days. So when it comes to it, I just say I have crappy service and never got the message. Pretty much everyone thinks my service is for shit. But the truth is, I'm a terrible person. An adult acting childlike. People think it's cringe, but age regression is a trauma response. You can especially see this as you've ever been to a psych ward. People are clinging to blankets and stuffed animals. childhood was probably the last time they existed without being traumatized. This one is so painful for me. I was sexually abused from a very young age, and sometimes I'll go into these states where I can only think and occasionally talk out loud to myself in a child's voice. I'm aware of it, but I can't stop. I usually end up curled up with a stuffed animal. Bless you, dear. We can't even imagine a speck of your trauma. Wish you continuous healing, protection, and nurturing relationships. Dude, that's so nice. But it's also hilarious because you sound like the best grandma ever, but your username. Constant dark humor or self-deprecating humor. Also the ability to totally pretend crappy things never happened, or pretend someone didn't do something awful to you. People might think you're really funny and forgiving, but sometimes they are both just coping mechanisms. This is my go-to. Living with ADHD and past trauma, I have a goldfish memory when it comes to shitty behavior from other people. I'm also not as funny as a lot of people think I am. I just have to laugh at it, or I won't stop crying about it. Getting disproportionately frustrated at themselves for small accidents such as spilling things, accidentally breaking something, etc. What happens is, a lot of these people would be abused as a kid for these things. So as an adult, when it happens, their brain overloads their system with fear and anxiety, and frustration can be secondary emotion to that. So when these things happens, this is basically a conditioned response, because your brain associates these accidents with imminent danger. This is why therapy is so important for people who had shit childhoods, especially during their developing years. I had no idea this was a thing until I went to therapy. But when my therapist explained this to me, it made so much sense. And now when these things happen, I tend to laugh it off. Yep, as a kid I was never allowed to make mistakes. Bad grade, grounded until next report card, dropped a glass, berated for being sloppy and careless, exact words, lost something, also sloppy and careless. I went through this my entire childhood and lived with my parents off and on through college. In my first 2 jobs after college I had managers that did the same thing. So I just assumed I was the fuck up. I started my current job right at a year ago, and I found a mistake I had made a few months back. I went straight to my boss. It could potentially be a costly mistake, and his response? Thank you for letting me know, and thank you for tracking everything down for me. I kind of pushed, like to make sure he understood that I fucked up, and he says yeah, it's okay, we're all human, and as your boss it was my job to make sure you understood what was asked. I didn't, and you made an understandable mistake, and now you've done everything in your power to help fix it. I'm proud of you. I held it together for the remaining 3 hours of my shift, but I burst into tears the second I got in the car to go home. I have never had someone treat me with such kindness and actually recognize that I didn't make that mistake on purpose. And he also recognized that I tried my hardest to make things easier for him and that I wanted to work together to fix things. I wish I knew what it's like to have a boss who is understanding, even if I'd be the one at fault. I got fired from my last bigger / non-temp job because my project manager, and I quote her manager, wasn't any good at communicating what needs to be done, couldn't handle giving orders, couldn't give criticism, and so on. I got fired because my project manager literally couldn't do either the project or the manager side of things. Lol. Extreme self-cringe. Doubting if what you said was the right thing. Doubting if you acted the right way or behaved the right way in a social setting. Asking someone several times if you did something correctly. Zoning out because you randomly remembered a traumatic childhood memory. Low self-esteem. Lack of confidence. IDK if I have trauma, but this is the worst. My self-cringe only lets me say the safest possible things, which is oftentimes nothing. And it leads me to be very boring. Or the process of finding the right / safe thing to say takes too long to actually say it with the right timing. By the way, hesitation is usually interpreted as dishonesty. Inability to form and keep relationships. Having sparse or little to no memory of your childhood. Eating disorders. Depression. Social anxiety. Agoraphobia. Extreme emotional shifts. Attachment issues. Consistent exhaustion. Strong unexplainable reactions towards social stimuli. Separation anxiety. gastrointestinal issues and complications, substance abuse and addiction, intrusive thoughts, self-destructive behavior, etc. Hi me, it's me again. You can subdue, but never tame me. It gives me a migraine headache, sinking down to your level.